Imagine you're standing on the bridge of a warship so large that it takes nearly 4 minutes to walk its full length from bow to stern. Beneath your feet, 2 nuclear reactors are generating enough electricity to power an entire city of 1 million people. Around you, on a flight deck the size of 3 football fields laid end to end, aircraft worth hundreds of millions of dollars each are being armed, fueled, and prepared to launch in a sequence so precise it looks less like a military operation and more like the choreography of some enormous, lethal machine. In the water around you, destroyers and cruisers form a protective ring stretching miles in every direction, a floating fortress of combined firepower that no other nation on Earth can assemble at sea. Somewhere beneath the surface, attack submarines move in silent escort, invisible to every sensor an adversary possesses. The aircraft on that deck are not just fighters, they are F-35s and F-A-18 Super Hornets. 5th-generation weapon systems capable of striking targets hundreds of miles inland before a single warning is issued. This warship displaces more than 100,000 tons of seawater, moves at speeds that defy its mass, and carries within its 25 decks a crew of 4,500 men and women whose sole purpose is to project American military power to any corner of the globe within days. It has no equal in human history. To understand why the USS Gerald R matters, why its existence reshapes the strategic calculations of every military power on Earth, you first need to understand what an aircraft carrier actually does in the context of modern warfare. An aircraft carrier is not simply a ship that carries airplanes. It is a mobile sovereign territory, a piece of American soil that can be repositioned anywhere on the planet's oceans within days, carrying with it an air wing of strike aircraft, electronic warfare platforms, surveillance systems, and the command and control infrastructure to coordinate an entire regional air campaign. When the United States moves a carrier strike group into a region of tension, it is not making a gesture. It is fundamentally altering the military reality of that region in ways that no amount of based military positioning can replicate. Aircraft carriers give the United States the ability to bring air power to bear anywhere on Earth without requiring permission from allied governments for basing rights, without relying on forward logistics chains that can be disrupted or denied, and without the political complications that come with stationing forces on foreign soil. The message sent by a carrier strike group's arrival in contested waters is received immediately and clearly by every military and political leader in the region. Your airspace is no longer yours. Your coastline is no longer protected by geography alone, and the balance of power in these waters has just shifted irrevocably in favor of the United States. That is the strategic function of the aircraft carrier, and the USS Gerald R. performs that function at a level that no predecessor and no rival can match. The story of the USS Gerald R. does not begin with the ship itself. It begins with a recognition, arrived at slowly and painfully by the United States Navy through decades of operational experience, that the aircraft carrier fleet that had won the Cold War was aging, and that the technological gap between American carriers and potential adversaries was narrowing in ways that demanded a fundamental rethinking of how carriers were designed, built, and operated. The Nimitz-class carriers, the backbone of American naval air power since the 1970s, were extraordinary machines, and several of them remain in service today. But they were designed in an era when the primary threat they were built to defeat was Soviet naval aviation and submarine warfare in the open ocean. The world of the 21st century is more complicated. Adversaries, primarily China and Russia, have invested specifically and deliberately in technologies designed to threaten and potentially neutralize carrier strike groups, long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles, advanced submarine fleets, hypersonic weapons, and sophisticated anti-access area denial networks designed to push American carriers away from the shores they need to operate near. In this environment, the United States Navy needed a carrier that was not just bigger than its predecessors, but fundamentally more capable of generating more combat sorties per day, carrying more aircraft and more varied weapon systems, sustaining higher operational tempos for longer periods, and incorporating automation systems that reduced the manpower burden while increasing the ship's overall combat effectiveness. The Ford-class carrier program was the answer to that requirement, and the USS Gerald R. Ford, commissioned in 2017 as the lead ship of that new class, is the embodiment of that answer. The construction of the USS Gerald R. Ford was itself a feat of engineering that pushed the boundaries of what industrial civilization is capable of producing. The project officially began in 2005 when Northrop Grumman, one of the most significant defense contractors in American history, a company whose portfolio includes the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, conducted a ceremonial first steel cut for what would become CVN-78. In 2008, the Navy formalized a construction contract valued at $5.1 billion, establishing Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia as the construction site, the only shipyard in the United States capable of building nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. What followed was nearly a decade of construction involving thousands of workers, millions of individual components, systems that had never been built before at this scale, and engineering challenges that required solving problems for which no previous solution existed. The ship was built in sections, massive modular blocks fabricated separately and then assembled in a dry dock, a process that required extraordinary precision because any misalignment at the block joining stage would propagate through the entire vessel. In October 2013, the dry dock was flooded for the first time, the naval equivalent of an aircraft's maiden flight, marking the moment the ship transitioned from a construction project to a vessel. Delivery to the Navy finally occurred on May 31, 2017, 9 years after the construction contract was signed. The total cost had grown to more than $12 billion, approximately 22% above the original budget. Estimate, a figure that drew criticism from Congress and military budget analysts. But that cost figure requires context. Embedded within it was $7 billion dedicated purely to research and development, the price of inventing technologies that had never existed before. Technologies that would be carried forward into every subsequent Ford-class carrier at a fraction of that initial investment. The most visible and most frequently discussed innovation of the USS Gerald R. Ford is a system that most people outside the military have never heard of: the Electromagnetic Aircraft Launch System, universally known by its acronym EMALS. To understand why this system matters, you first need to understand what it replaced. For decades, American aircraft carriers launched their aircraft using steam catapults, systems that stored enormous quantities of pressurized steam generated by the ship's reactors, then released that steam through a cylinder to accelerate an aircraft from 0 to flying speed in approximately 2 seconds across a 300-foot track. Steam catapults worked. They had launched millions of aircraft sorties from carriers since their introduction in the 1950s, but they were also massive, maintenance-intensive, mechanically complex systems that occupied enormous volumes of space below the flight deck, required large crews to operate and maintain, and imposed significant physical stress on the aircraft they launched, stresses that over time degraded airframes and shortened service lives. EMALS replaces all of that with a fundamentally different approach: electromagnetic induction. Linear induction motors mounted along the launch track generate a powerful, precisely controlled electromagnetic field that accelerates the aircraft along the track to flying speed. The key word is controlled. Unlike steam catapults, which applied their force in a sharp, nearly instantaneous spike, EMALS supplies its force in a programmable, smoothly ramping profile that can be precisely calibrated for each individual aircraft type and weight configuration. This means gentler handling of airframes, which translates to extended service lives and reduced maintenance costs. It means faster reset times between launches, which translates to higher sortie generation rates. And it means the ability to launch aircraft types and weights across a wider range than steam catapults could accommodate, including unmanned aircraft systems whose airframes cannot withstand the stress peaks of steam launch. Paired with EMALS on the launch side of the flight deck, Equation is an equally revolutionary system managing the recovery of aircraft returning from missions. The Advanced Arresting Gear, known as AAG, when a carrier aircraft returns to the ship. It must transition from flight speeds to a dead stop in approximately 2 seconds, achieved by catching one of several steel cables stretched across the aft end of the flight deck, with a hook attached to the aircraft's tail. On previous carriers, the energy of that arrestment was absorbed by hydraulic systems, massive water twister mechanisms that worked through fluid resistance to dissipate the aircraft's kinetic energy. The Advanced Arresting Gear replaces those hydraulic systems with a computer-controlled electric motor that absorbs the energy of landing aircraft through electromagnetic braking, managed by a real-time computer system that adjusts the braking force dynamically based on the aircraft's weight and approach speed. The practical result is the same as EMALS on the launch side: smoother, more precisely controlled energy application, reduced airframe stress, wider compatibility with different aircraft types and weights, and significantly reduced maintenance demands. Together, EMALS and AAG transform the Gerald Ford's flight deck operations from a process constrained by the mechanical limitations of steam and hydraulics to one governed by the precision and adaptability of software-controlled electromagnetic systems. The theoretical sortie generation rate of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the number of combat aircraft sorties it can launch and recover per day, is estimated at 160 sorties per day under surge conditions, compared to approximately 120 for Nimitz-class carriers. In the mathematics of sustained combat air operations, that difference is not incremental, it is decisive. 160 sorties per day means more bombs on more targets, more air superiority patrols maintained, more support for ground forces, more persistent presence over a contested operational area, a quantifiable, measurable increase in combat power generated by the technological shift from steam to electromagnetic energy management. The nuclear heart of the USS Gerald R. Ford deserves its own careful examination, because it is the foundation upon which everything else the ship can do is built. The ship is powered by 2 Bechtel A1B nuclear reactors, a new reactor design developed specifically for the Ford class, representing a significant advancement over the A4W reactors that powered the Nimitz-class carriers. Each A1B reactor generates approximately 350 megawatts of electrical power. Combined, the 2 reactors produce approximately 700 megawatts, roughly 3 times the electrical generation capacity of the Nimitz-class reactors. This increase in electrical generation is not incidental. It is the enabling technology for everything else aboard the ship. EMALS requires enormous instantaneous electrical power to accelerate aircraft along the launch track. AAG requires electrical power to manage arrestment energy. The ship's combat systems, radars, electronic warfare suites, communications arrays, weapons control systems, all require electrical power. Now, the warfare environment of the 21st century demands more of these systems, running at higher power levels than any previous carrier generation. The A1B reactors provide that power with margin to spare for future systems that haven't yet been installed. And like all naval nuclear reactors, the A1B operates on highly enriched uranium with a core life estimated at 25 years, meaning the ship will likely never need refueling during its projected 50-year operational service life. The implications of this are strategic as well as technical. A carrier that never needs to return to port for fuel is a carrier that can sustain continuous operational presence at sea for as long as its crew rotation, food supply, and aircraft maintenance demands allow. Geography cannot constrain it. Supply chains for fuel cannot threaten it. It goes where it needs to go for as long as it needs to stay. Beyond its propulsion and launch systems, the USS Gerald R. Ford incorporates a comprehensive redesign of the physical layout of the ship itself, changes that seem subtle in description, but carry profound implications for how effectively the ship can conduct combat operations. The island, the structure that rises above the flight deck containing the navigation bridge, flight operations center, and communications systems, has been reduced in size and repositioned further aft compared to Nimitz-class carriers. This seemingly simple change expands the usable area of the flight deck, improving the efficiency with which aircraft can be positioned, armed, fueled, and moved to launch positions. The ship incorporates 23 new systems compared to the previous carrier generation, each one designed to reduce the crew workload required to operate the ship at maximum effectiveness. The result is a ship that requires a smaller crew than its predecessors to operate at the higher level of combat effectiveness, where a Nimitz-class carrier required a ship's company of approximately 3,200 personnel, not counting the embarked air wing and associated staff. The Ford class is designed to operate with a reduced ship's company, with automation systems handling functions that previously required human operators. Fewer people aboard means lower operating costs per deployment, a smaller logistical tail to sustain, and more physical space available for mission-critical functions rather than crew berthing and support. It also means, in the brutal mathematics of combat damage, fewer lives at risk to keep the ship operational. This redesigned philosophy of doing more with less through intelligent automation runs through every system of the Gerald Ford, from the ammunition handling systems that move ordnance from deep in the ship's magazines to the flight deck with reduced crew requirements, to the maintenance management systems that predict equipment failures before they occur and schedule preventive intervention accordingly. The air wing that operates from the USS Gerald R. Ford is itself a weapon system of extraordinary capability, and understanding it is essential to understanding the ship's true military power. The Gerald Ford can accommodate up to 90 aircraft of multiple types, a number that by itself exceeds the total combat aircraft inventory of many of the world's mid-tier air forces. The primary strike aircraft are the Lockheed Martin F-35C, Lightning II, the carrier variant of the fifth-generation stealth multi-role fighter, and the Boeing F/A-18EF Super Hornet, the workhorse of American carrier aviation for the past 2 decades. The F-35C brings stealth, sensor fusion, and networked warfare capabilities to carrier aviation that simply did not exist in previous generations, an aircraft that can penetrate defended airspace without being detected, gather and distribute intelligence while conducting its own strike mission, and serve as a node in a broader networked combat system that shares data with every other platform in the strike group in real time. Complementing the strike aircraft are the E-2D Advanced Hawkeye, a propeller-driven, airborne early warning and command aircraft carrying one of the most capable airborne radar systems in the world, capable of tracking hundreds of targets simultaneously at ranges exceeding 350 miles. And the EA-18G Growler, an electronic warfare variant of the Super Hornet designed to jam adversary radar and communications systems, degrade their air defense networks, and create the electromagnetic conditions under which strike aircraft can operate with reduced risk. No serious examination of the USS Gerald R. Ford's strategic significance can proceed without confronting the question of the threat environment in which it must operate, specifically the sophisticated anti-access area denial capabilities that China and Russia have developed with the explicit purpose of denying American carriers the ability to operate near their shores. China's DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic Missiles are frequently described in open-source military literature as carrier killers. Weapons designed to strike moving ships at sea with precision warheads delivered at hypersonic speeds from ranges exceeding 1,000 miles. Russia has invested in advanced submarine capabilities and long-range anti-ship cruise missiles carried by both submarines and aircraft. Both nations have developed electronic warfare and cyber capabilities designed to degrade the command, control, and targeting systems that a carrier strike group depends upon to function effectively. The existence of these threats is real, and serious American military planners take them seriously. But the threat picture requires context that is often absent from sensationalized coverage. First, the Gerald Ford does not operate alone. It operates as part of a strike group that includes Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers and Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, carrying the most capable shipborne air defense system in the world, supported by attack submarines operating in a wide perimeter around the formation. Second, the threat weapons face extraordinary challenges of their own. Hitting a moving ship at sea requires targeting data of sufficient accuracy to place a warhead on a target that has moved since the targeting solution was computed, a problem that requires real-time targeting support that is itself vulnerable to American electronic warfare and cyber operations. The USS Gerald R. Ford exists in this threat environment not as a vulnerable target, but as one component of a layered, mutually supporting system of systems designed to operate effectively even when adversaries do their worst. The global power projection capability represented by the USS Gerald R. Ford and its sisters must be understood not just in technical terms, but in strategic and geopolitical terms, in terms of what the presence of this ship in a given body of water communicates to every government, military command, and potential adversary in that region. When the USS Gerald R. Ford was ordered to the eastern Mediterranean following the outbreak of the Israel-Hamas conflict in October 2023, the message was transmitted instantly and unambiguously to every actor in the region, to Iran, to Hezbollah, to any state actor contemplating intervention in the conflict. The message was not spoken. It did not need to be. The ship's presence, visible on every military radar and satellite imagery system in the region, its air wing ready to generate strikes within hours of receiving orders, its strike group forming a combined defensive and offensive architecture that no regional actor could meaningfully challenge, was itself the communication. This is the meaning of power projection in the 21st century, not the actual use of military force, but the credible demonstration of the capability and will to use it, positioned in a way that alters the cost-benefit calculations of potential adversaries before they commit to action. The deterrent value of a deployed carrier strike group is difficult to quantify, but impossible to dismiss. How many Iranian decisions to escalate were not made because the Gerald Ford was there? How many Hezbollah operations were constrained? We cannot know with precision what the counterfactual looks like, what would have happened in that region in the absence of that carrier. What we do know is that the United States chose to deploy its most advanced warship to that region at a moment of maximum tension, and that the escalation that many feared in those early weeks did not materialize. Correlation is not causation. But the deterrent presence of the USS Gerald R. Ford in those waters was not incidental to that outcome. The comparison between the USS Gerald R. Ford and its nearest rivals in the world's other naval powers is ultimately a comparison between different strategic visions of what naval power is and what it is for. China's Fujian carrier, its most advanced, commissioned in 2022, is the only non-American carrier in the world equipped with electromagnetic catapults, representing a significant technological advancement for Chinese naval aviation. It displaces approximately 80,000 tons and is designed to operate a modern, air wing, including the J-15 carrier strike fighter and potentially next-generation unmanned systems. The United Kingdom's HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales are ski jump carriers operating the F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing variant without catapults or arresting gear, limiting the weight of aircraft and weapons they can operate. France's Charles de Gaulle, while nuclear-powered and catapult-equipped, displaces approximately 42,000 tons and carries approximately 40 aircraft. Russia's Admiral Kuznetsov has spent more time in repair facilities than at sea, has suffered multiple accidents and fires during its maintenance periods, and represents a capability that is real in theory, but deeply compromised in practice. Against this global field, the USS Gerald R. Ford, displacing over 100,000 tons, nuclear-powered with reactors generating 3 times the electricity of previous American carriers, equipped with electromagnetic launch and recovery systems, capable of accommodating 90 aircraft and generating 160 combat sorties per day, stands not at the head of a competitive field, but in a category largely of its own creation. The gap between American carrier aviation and every other nation's carrier aviation is not narrowing in ways that suggest parity within any strategically relevant time frame. The psychological dimension of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the effect of its existence and deployment on the cognitive and emotional landscape of military and political decision-making, is a phenomenon that deserves serious treatment because it is inseparable from the ship's actual strategic value. Military deterrence is ultimately a psychological phenomenon. It works not through the physical application of force, but through the anticipation of force, through the belief, held by a potential adversary, that the costs of a contemplated action exceed its benefits by a margin that makes the action irrational. The USS Gerald R. Ford contributes to this deterrent calculus in a way that is qualitatively different from other military assets. A squadron of F-35s based at a foreign airfield is powerful, but it is fixed in place, dependent on host nation agreements, and vulnerable to political decisions that could see its basing rights withdrawn. A land-based missile battery is powerful, but it is static, targetable, and unable to reposition in response to changing strategic conditions. The Gerald Ford is neither fixed nor static. It can be in the Persian Gulf today and in the South China Sea in 2 weeks. It can be conducting training exercises in the North Atlantic and arrive in a crisis zone within days of receiving orders. It carries enough combat power within itself before considering the supporting destroyers, submarines, and land-based aircraft that integrate with it to decisively shape the air campaign over a medium-sized adversary nation. Any military planner who must factor American carrier power into their calculations must account for the possibility that the USS Gerald R. Ford, or one of its sisters, could arrive in their theater within a timeline that forecloses certain options and constrains others. That uncertainty, that impossibility of planning around a capability that refuses to stay in one place, is itself a strategic weapon of considerable power. The future of American carrier aviation, and by extension, the future of the USS Gerald R. Ford's legacy, is visible in the programs currently in development that will eventually integrate with or succeed the platforms that make up today's Ford-class air wing. The MQ-25 Stingray unmanned aerial refueling aircraft is the first unmanned aircraft designed for carrier integration and is currently in active development and testing, with delivery to the fleet expected in the coming years. The Stingray's primary mission is aerial refueling, extending the combat radius of the manned strike aircraft in the air wing by serving as a carrier-based tanker, eliminating the current requirement to dedicate manned fighter aircraft to the tanking mission. But the Stingray's significance goes beyond its immediate mission. It is the first unmanned aircraft to be fully integrated into carrier operations. demonstrating that the USS Gerald R. Ford's EMALS and AAG systems can successfully operate unmanned aircraft, opening the door to subsequent unmanned platforms that could conduct strike, surveillance, and electronic warfare missions alongside and eventually in place of manned aircraft. Beyond the Stingray, the Navy is investing in next-generation strike aircraft concepts that will eventually replace the Super Hornet, directed energy weapon systems that could eventually be installed aboard Ford-class carriers using the massive electrical generation capacity of their A-1B reactors, and advanced networking and artificial intelligence systems that will further enhance the speed and precision with which the ship's air wing can plan, execute, and assess combat operations. The USS Gerald R. Ford was not designed for the threats and opportunities of 2017. It was designed for the threats and opportunities of 2050, and the electrical power margin built into its reactors, the open architecture of its systems, and the adaptability of its electromagnetic launch and recovery infrastructure are all deliberate choices made to ensure that this ship remains at the cutting edge of naval combat power for decades beyond its commissioning. There is a moment in the pre-dawn darkness over any ocean where the USS Gerald R. Ford is operating, when the full weight of what this ship represents becomes physically, viscerally apparent. It is the moment when the first aircraft of the morning launches. The EMALS system charges silently. No hiss of accumulating steam, no mechanical clatter of a piston system building pressure. The aircraft accelerates down the track in 2 seconds, climbing into a sky that is still dark at the horizon, navigation lights receding into the distance. Below decks, 2 nuclear reactors that will not need refueling for 25 years continue their quiet work of splitting atoms and generating the electricity that runs everything on this vessel. In the Combat Direction Center, controllers are tracking every contact within hundreds of miles of the ship. In the submarine operating beneath the formation, sonar operators are listening for threats that haven't yet arrived. On the destroyers surrounding the ship, surface search radars sweep continuously. Missile batteries hold ready. This is not a snapshot of a machine at rest. This is a system at work. 100,000 tons of American military power, nuclear-fueled, electromagnetically equipped, crewed by 4,500 people, carrying 90 aircraft, surrounded by a protective formation of warships, supported by submarines, connected to satellites and ground stations around the world, capable of putting 160 combat sorties into the air every single day. No nation has ever built anything like this before. No nation currently under construction will match it within the next decade. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not simply the most advanced warship in the world. It is the physical embodiment of a strategic doctrine, the doctrine that American power will go wherever it chooses, whenever it chooses, and that no adversary's geography, investment, or ambition can prevent it from arriving. If this has expanded your understanding of what modern military power truly looks like, subscribe to Battlefield Insight. Hit the notification bell, because there is more to understand, and understanding it is the beginning of seeing the world as it actually is.